are ready.
So I'd like to call the meeting to order for the Monday, September 28th, 2020 Planning Commission and Commission for Citizen Involvement meeting. Iris, would you please call the roll?
Beckett?
Here.
Fisher?
Here.
Heap?
Here.
Pape?
Here.
Simler?
Here.
Stewart?
Here.
And I believe Whitman is excused.
All right, thank you, Iris. We have quorum, so we'll continue. Next on our agenda was a council update. I believe our council update is going to be maybe the next meeting. We don't have a council update for this meeting. And then moving on, next is the opportunity for citizens to raise comments for issues that are not on the agenda. Iris, I didn't see anyone who would like to make a citizen comment tonight. Is there anyone that wishes to make a citizen comment?
There are none.
All right, so we'll move on. Next is item number 5 on our agenda, which is the Commission for Citizen Involvement general updates. So we do have a couple updates I'd like to announce. The first is that the Evergreen Neighborhood Association will hold their annual membership meeting by Zoom, and that'll be held Tuesday, October 13th at 7 p.m. So anyone that's a member of the Evergreen Neighborhood Association, I encourage you to attend the annual membership meeting. There is an email address. It's the email address if you're wishing to get more information about the meeting is LOELO for Lake Oswego, Evergreen NA for Neighborhood Association. So that's LO Evergreen NA at gmail.com. And that meeting's Tuesday, October 13th at 7 p.m. Also, the Old Town Neighborhood Association is holding their general meeting on Thursday, October 8th at 7 p.m. via Zoom. Anyone that's wishing to attend is asked to send or contact B, that's B as in boy, .wosko, WOSKO at comcast.net. They're also going to have a special guest, Patrick Melee, editor of the Lake Oswego Review, who will talk about local journalism and its role in democracy. So again, that's the Old Town Neighborhood Association General Meeting, Thursday, October 8th, 2020 at 7 p.m. via Zoom. And then also we have a notice that the Waluga Neighborhood Association will have its annual general meeting on Wednesday, October 14th, 2020 from 7 to 8:15 p.m. Via Zoom. So they expect to elect the 2021 board members and cover a number of topics. So they're asking anybody that's interested to RSVP on or before Tuesday, October 13th, 2020 at 7 p.m. by emailing waluga.neighborhood.association@gmail.com. So a number of neighborhood association annual meetings coming up, and again, encourage all members of those neighborhood associations to attend. Next on the agenda is item number 6 under 6.1. It's the September 14th, 2020 meeting minutes. I was not present at that meeting, so I'll be abstaining. But commissioners, any comments, corrections, changes that commissioners wish to make for the September 14th, 2020 meeting minutes? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the meeting minutes for September 14th, 2020?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
There's a motion to approve in a second. Since we're doing Zoom, maybe Iris can, well, let me just say, all those in favor of approving?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any nays? None. And one abstain. I'll abstain, Iris, since I wasn't present at the meeting.
I would like to abstain also, Chair Heat. I was.
Oh.
I
You're
wasn't
up
at the
to
meeting.
Commissioner Sumler.
Who is also abstaining, please?
It's Commissioner Sumler would like to abstain. He wasn't present either. Okay, thank you. Next on our agenda is item number 7. This is a public hearing that's being carried forward from September 14th, 2020. This is the 2020 Annual Community Development Code Amendments, LU 20-0015. Public testimony is accepted. This is a request from the City of Lake Oswego for proposed amendments to the Community Development Code to clarify platting requirements and the expiration of permits for lot line adjustments and resource delineations, allow RID variances to the long wall plane standard, change sensitive lands protection fence height to match tree production fence height, clarify utilities exception in RP districts, remove obsolete fence requirements, or excuse me, remove obsolete fence requirements apply to resource restoration resulting from a code violation, require pre-application conference for in-stream resource enhancements projects, provide a clear and objective option for creation of flag lot access lanes, move no parking requirements for outdoor dining to parking table, clarify that all residential zones allow manufactured homes, modify definitions of net developable area and density transfer area, remove annual reporting requirement for sensitive lands map corrections, calculate bicycle requirement, adopt fire code requirements for fire hydrant placement in new development, prevent driveway approaches from extending in front of abutting properties, align lot coverage calculation in the R6 zone with other residential zones, define co-housing and add to multifamily definition, define community institution and institutional use. The staff coordinator is Ellen Davis, Associated Planner. Ellen, is there any remarks that staff would like to make or any comments, background information that staff would like to make before we open it up for the public testimony?
Yeah, before Ellen speaks, there is a
Sure.
requirement that I have to make, or a saying or statement that I have to make on the process. I do want to indicate in your very good reading of the content of this, Mr. Chair, I think you missed one line. So
Sure.
I'll read that. It's to calculate bicycle parking requirements for unlisted uses, clarify definition for undisturbed slopes, and delete obsolete ADU parking requirements, and then adopt fire code requirements, etc. This is a legislative decision, which is generally a policy decision within the discretion of the City Council. The Planning Commission will review the legislative proposal and make a recommendation to the City Council. Although a legislative decision may be discretionary, it must also comply with any applicable state law, as well as any applicable statewide planning goal or administrative rule adopted pursuant to ORS Chapter 197. A legislative amendment to the Community Development Code must also comply with any applicable provision of the Lake Oswego Comprehensive Plan. The public hearing process will begin with a presentation by staff. Then testimony will then be received from the public. Individuals will be allowed up to 5 minutes. Recognized neighborhood associations, homeowner associations, government agencies, or other incorporated public interest organizations will be allowed up to 10 minutes. These time limits do not include time taken by questions from the commission or responses to such questions. Testimony by attorneys, representatives, and witnesses on behalf of or which is part of the presentation by a person shall be counted within that person's time limit. Any person in attendance may cede his or her time for testimony to another person, but in no case shall any person's testimony be increased to greater than 10 minutes. Now, because this is an electronic virtual meeting, if you have not already signed up and if you wish to testify tonight, you may participate electronically or telephonically. Some people may have signed up early and they're now on the Zoom via the link provided by staff. If you wish to testify and you've not signed up at this point, you may contact Iris McCaleb at 503-697-6591. Again, 503-697-6591, or at her email address at imccaleb. Again, that's imccaleb at lakeoswego.city, and provide your name, contact information. so that Iris can send you a Zoom link to join by computer or phone. When you do join, please mute your audio. When the speaker is finished, then Iris will announce that you have joined in. Let's see. Now, at this point, I would ask the commission members to please, oh, one other thing. We have about probably a 1 minute delay on YouTube, so do call in now rather than waiting. Okay. At this point, I would ask the commission members to please declare if you have any financial conflicts of interest. Mr. Chairman, if you'd go ahead and declare if you have any financial conflict of interest, then poll the commission.
I have no conflicts of interest. I'll just go down the line then. Commissioner Beckett,
None.
Commissioner Simler,
None.
Commissioner Pape,
None.
Commissioner Phillip,
None.
Commissioner Fisher, sorry.
None.
I believe that is all the commissioners.
Thank you. All right, at this point, the Associate Planner Ellen Davis with the staff report.
Okay, good evening, commissioners. I believe I should be sharing my screen with you all now, hopefully. Okay, so thank you so much, Mr. Chair, for giving such a great brief overview. I'll try to keep this pretty quick since I know you've gone through this all twice before and we did just listen to it all be listed out, so thank you again. In our process, we are at the rescheduled Planning Commission public hearing. We'll adopt findings at the meeting on the 12th in 2 weeks, and then the City Council will hold a public hearing on this issue on November 3rd. I will just kind of click through most of these amendments since we did just read through them, although I'm going to call some attention to number 6, reduction of protected riparian area. I did receive some calls and confusion about this item, so I just wanted to take 1 minute to explain it in a little bit more detail. So currently our code allows buffer averaging, cases where you have a protected area around a wetland or a stream, and because of the development that you're doing, if it needs to be close to that stream or wetland, then you can encroach into that area as long as you are increasing the area that is protected in another area so that the average buffer still meets the minimum buffer width for that resource. Currently, there is a 25-foot and a 30-foot protected area addressed in our code under this section for buffer averaging, but the 50-foot protected riparian area, which already exists on certain properties, is not listed here. So we're just adding that 50-foot listing so that if you have a 25-foot, a 30-foot, or a 50-foot buffer, if this applies, you can apply for this process. So I know that that wasn't as clear as it could have been in that Measure 56 notice, so I just wanted to draw some attention to that. And then we did run through most of these pretty quickly, so I'm going to jump down to the policy amendments since they are a little more controversial. Our first policy amendment is to prevent driveway approaches from extending in front of abutting properties. And this proposal is that even if you have an angled property, that angle of your side property line would continue into the public right-of-way. You should place your driveway between the extensions of your 2 side property lines. The benefits to this regulation would be increased control over your driveway approach, including site distance, stormwater, and the other externalities that come along with a driveway approach. So this will prevent those from spilling over onto your neighboring property and hopefully aid in clarification and making it clear who is responsible for what area, and hopefully this will smooth some things out. Our second policy item is lot coverage in the R6 zone. This is in the R6 zone, which is only located in First Edition neighborhood. And staff, we are proposing to change the current lot coverage calculation system in R6, how height is measured for a house, and make it match all of the other zones in the city. So all of the other zones in the city rely on this measurement of building height as the way that height is measured for the purpose of calculating lot coverage. If you have a taller house, you are allowed less lot coverage. And if you have a shorter house, you're allowed to spread out more within your lot. So we look at the height of the house first to then determine how much lot coverage can be granted to a new build. And in the case of the R6 zone, we currently have its own specific called out way of measuring building height, measured by a flat plane from the highest point of the natural grade within the building envelope, provided that the height is no more than 4 feet higher than the base height. And we are, again, proposing to do away with that definition that's specific to the R6 zone and switch to a more general measurement of building height, which all of the other zones already use as their measurement for height. And the other change that we are proposing in this R6 zone is the R6 zone also has separate allowances or exceptions to lot coverage that do not match any of the other zones. So currently the R6 zone allows decks that are up to 5 feet high, or I guess 4 feet and 11 inches above grade, to not count towards lot coverage. In all other zones, there's a 30-inch maximum height for a structure not to count towards lot coverage. So if something is taller than 30 inches, then that structure would count towards lot coverage in any other zone. So we are proposing to do away with this 5-foot exception, the R6 zone, to make it more similar to all of our other zones. The same with external stairs are currently not included in lot coverage, whereas again, if they are taller than 30 inches, they would count towards lot coverage in any other zone. We are proposing that. Pergolas and trellises, if they are at least 25% open, are already accepted from lot coverage. So there's really no purpose to call that out separately in the R6 zone, since those are already accepted from the lot coverage calculation in the definition of lot coverage for all zones. And then concrete slabs also are already exempt from lot coverage as long as they're less than 30 inches above grade. So that's, again, another unnecessary exemption in this zone specifically. So we are proposing to get rid of these zone-specific, more detailed regulations and to revert back to all of the other zones. So it would be easier for the design professionals and for residents to understand how lot coverage works within their neighborhood and what does and doesn't count towards lot coverage.
Ms. Davis,
Yes.
do you know why this area was different than all the other areas? I mean, was there something unique about this neighborhood, or?
I believe the R6 zone was created after many of the other zones. I know Mr. Boone might have a little bit more of that history since it was before my time that the R6 zone was created, but I know it was created specifically and individually.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, it came from the neighborhood plan. And so, and that's really where this proposed amendment comes from, is from the neighborhood association that has had, years of experience with the code, the flexibility that the code provides, and based on the outcomes that they're seeing, they've commented numerous times that they believe the overall mass on these lots where height is measured differently is out of proportion in some cases, and the exceptions are resulting in overbuilding. So staff is proposing the change based on the recommendation.
And another concern that we as staff have heard from the neighborhood association has been that in many cases, what is currently a small house footprint is being removed and a much larger house footprint and associated lot coverage going in on that lot. So a lot of trees are coming out and there's not enough room to replant trees that can reach that same mature size because there's so much less growing space. This change probably is unlikely to drastically change the amount of lot coverage. It's more likely to be within a few percentage points, but we're hoping that at least getting that few percentage points more space for mitigation trees or for existing trees to remain will hopefully help alleviate a little bit of that pressure in first edition.
Thank you.
Just one more question for you, Ms. Davis. So the neighborhood association is in favor of this, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you.
So another proposed policy amendment is to add a definition of co-housing. And the reason this came about is because we had an application earlier this year for a co-housing project in which multiple units would share one large cooking or kitchen facility. And currently, our code requires each dwelling unit to have its own cooking facilities, bathroom facilities, living facilities, all within its own housekeeping unit. And so it was brought to our attention that this style of living, where you might share an amenity between multiple different separate dwelling units, was not currently allowed in our code. And so we are proposing a definition for community co-housing community, which would be a semi-communal housing consisting of multiple dwelling units in a multiple family dwelling. And we are specifically only allowing this in multifamily dwellings, multifamily zones. We're not increasing the density that's allowed. We're not allowing multifamily in a zone that doesn't currently allow it. So this is really looking internal to a structure at whether or not each unit has its own kitchen or some other shared facility. It's not changing the density, the use, the massing on any site in the city. So it just change what's allowed within of how they share those facilities. And so we did find that the code not having this sort of definition in our code was a barrier to that project. And it was not a density or any other issue. And we are proposing this. I believe that we did send you a chapter from our zoning practice on inclusive housing that discusses how housing and family needs have changed over time throughout the whole nation, and how allowing more flexibility and potentially sharing of facilities within a broader dwelling could help to alleviate some of the housing pressures in our neighborhood and allow more flexibility for families and for folks who want to live here. So we are trying to be more inclusive in our housing and less narrow in our thinking of what aspects or amenities can be shared between dwelling units. So we're trying to just expand that a bit. But again, we are not allowing co-housing multifamily dwelling outside of zones that already allow that multifamily dwelling. We're not changing the density. Any new multifamily project, co-housing or not, still has to go through the same process through the Development Review Commission, still need to meet all of the commercial design requirements for multifamily housing. It would also have to meet all of the overlay standards if it's located in overlay. So we're not changing the outside of the building or where that building is allowed. This is really just looking at internally how the residents operate within the internal walls of that new housing community. And this is adding flexibility, as I mentioned, allowing more communal co-housing communities potentially. It's not going to affect any single family zones. It is not part of House Bill 2001. And then our last policy definition or policy change is a definition of community institution and institutional use. Currently, we have both community institution and institutional use, and they have somewhat overlapping definitions. So we're proposing to condense both definitions into just the institutional use definition without losing any of the uses that are allowed. And in an earlier work session, we did have a question about having cultural and civic called out as two separate uses. And after a bit of research, we did find that cultural and civic do have very slightly different definitions. And because we aren't trying to lose any definitions that are currently allowed in the code, we do propose keeping both cultural and civic so that both of those uses could potentially be allowed as an institutional use, so that we're not limiting applicants in the future. So we are trying to maintain all of the currently listed uses without getting rid of any of them, but trying to also condense it for ease of use. And that is the end of my presentation. So please let me know if you have any questions.
Ellen Evan here. Did you want to cover on the institutional use why government buildings and schools are not considered part of civic? We had that conversation as well.
We did have that conversation. Civic and cultural uses are not public facilities. Public facilities or public institutions are already listed and called out in separate definitions in the code. So a government or a public institution would not be an institutional use.
Right. So that's the point I wanted to make on that issue, is that we already specifically defined public schools and government buildings as part of public facilities or major public facilities. And so those are zoned differently than institutional. They've already been addressed. So we exclude those from the definition so we don't end up having conglomeration, if you will, when we're looking at what institutional uses are. So take that. So they're taken out because they're dealt with elsewhere as public facilities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Boone. Commissioners, any questions? I think Vice Chair Pepe, you had a question.
Yeah, Ms. Davis, can you help me understand better how the communal living portion is not a part of, and maybe Director Siegel can also chime in on this too, how it's not a part of House Bill either 2000 or 2001?
So one way it's not in all affecting House Bill 2001 is House Bill 2001 is looking at single family zoning areas and doing away with that single family zoning to allow additional uses. In this case, we're not looking at single family housing at all. We're only looking at multifamily housing in zones that already allow multifamily. So we're not looking at your single family lot in the middle of a low density residential zone at all. This wouldn't apply, and you couldn't apply for this co-housing. We're only looking at cases where you have multiple dwelling units that are already allowed on that property. So it is no way related to single family housing.
If we're now able to have duplexes or triplexes or row houses, wouldn't, and we're moving away from the residential, doesn't it now apply?
If we wanted it to apply, if we did, or if we do get to a point where we are allowing those uses in certain locations, then we would have to go and do another code change. And as part of that broader change of our code for 2001, we would have to specifically allow or disallow it. So currently it's multifamily, which is defined differently than duplex or triplex in our code. So if we are allowing a duplex or triplex level in a low density residential zone, it still wouldn't be automatically allowed. That is something we could certainly consider when we are more prepared to address specific code allowances for House Bill 2001, but currently it wouldn't automatically apply.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask, Evan, does this in any way entangle the city in potential lawsuits? So supposing cohabitants start to conflict over the use of the kitchen or some other common facility, and we approved it, do they have any potential claim against the city for approving it?
Short answer is no. We regulate the use. We allow the use to occur on the private property, but the manner in which the private property is internally managed is, of course, up to the private parties in that. And I guess the good example might be we allow subdivisions, we allow multifamily dwellings. Some of those have common properties, and they need to deal with, they manage their own common properties themselves. So that's an internal management issue.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sumler?
Could this also apply to commercial projects like, say, like a short-term rental for professionals or something where there's dwelling units, but also, the co-housing of the kitchen, recreational facility? Is there carryover from multifamily into a different use, or is this specifically residential multifamily only?
Well, so you aren't allowed to have a short-term rental in a multifamily housing complex. So that, at least right now, how our code is currently structured, you're limited to one short-term rental per lot, and it can only go with a single-family residence. So currently, you could have at most a main house and an ADU, for instance, that could have a shared rec facility. But I believe that you probably already could share your yoga room or your exercise bike with your renters if you wanted. So this again wouldn't really apply to those single family cases with the short-term rental, especially because short-term rentals are not allowed in multifamily anyway.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Director Siegel, a comment?
Yeah, just wanted to answer the question about the first edition neighborhood and the R6 zoning. So both the R6 zone and the R2 zone were a result of the first edition neighborhood plan that was adopted in 1996. And the primary purpose of the R6 zone was to, replace the R75 zone, and it was intended to create a minimum lot size and development standards that were more consistent with the existing pattern of development in the neighborhood, which was 6,000 square foot lots. So that was where it came from and why it was put in place.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Vice Chair Pepe, did you have another question? No. Commissioners, any other questions, or can we open it up for public testimony? I see no other questions. So at this time, I'd like to take public testimony. Iris, could you please announce who would like to provide public testimony?
Yes, Roseanne Johnson.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson, would you like to speak now and provide your public testimony?
Or
Before
forever
she
hold my
does-
peace.
Yes, but before you do that,
Sure.
if you're representing an entity, please declare so I can determine whether you get 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And I will give a 1-minute warning because you can't see me sometimes. I'll give you a 1-minute oral warning then before your time expires.
Thank you, Attorney Boone.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Roseanne Johnson. I'm representing the Home Builders Association of Metropolitan Portland, otherwise known as HBA. HBA represents approximately 850 builders, developers, remodelers, and all of their associated suppliers and trades in the Portland metro region. So tens of thousands of men and women serving the residential construction industry in the Portland metropolitan region. Thank you for having me tonight. I would like to provide some public testimony on policy item 2 in your legislative packet, which is the Lake Oswego Code 50.04.001.2 FII. R6 maximum lot coverage standard. And so first and foremost, I would like to request on behalf of HBA and the handful of builders that we represent that do work in first edition, frankly, some more time to work on this code amendment with the neighborhood association. My understanding is the code amendment was brought up by the neighborhood association at the tail end of a late November meeting last year in 2019. And it was kind of suggested to be added on to a previous batch of cleanup code amendments that you guys undertake approximately annually. And staff at the time said, well, there's not enough time to add it to this one, but we'll add it to the next one, which is where you sit now. However, the problem with that was that it didn't have any time akin to that other previous round, which made it through council just this past spring. And then this current round, nor with this current round, to really have a robust stakeholder feedback session or numerous sessions akin to that previous round. It was just, like I said, inserted at the end as a proposal to effectively save trees or attempt to save trees, which is super commendable. And I will get to a point about that. But the main thrust here is we're requesting some additional time to work on this amendment with the association. The danger with adding something like this to the code or subtracting terminology or adding terminology is that the folks who actually build this product are expressing some unintended consequences. So, for example, reducing the developments, like in other words, the square footage allowed, by adjusting the way that you measure the height of the building, or you count certain stairways or balconies above 30 inches but below 5 feet, is that you really, it's really unclear whether this will actually save trees, right? So there are other contributing factors to tree preservation, such as alley-loaded garages, which is, if not heavily incentivized, but sometimes mandated in the R6 zone, which effectively, require you to access your garage from an alley and cuts into the backyard space, which is often where trees or, fauna might be. The other unintended consequences of this code amendment could be that the houses end up looking more boxy, if you will, with less articulation, meaning that you have more solid planes with less less features on the outside that make them appear more aesthetically pleasing. So examples of that might be a balcony that is between 30 inches and 5 feet, which is where that exemption to lot coverage would affect that type of articulation feature. Stairs, if you had maybe a 2.5-story structure with an ADU in the bottom, or a basement, daylight basement, and then you had stairs going up to your half-story, which is your main floor. If you saw those on the outside, they may not be allowed anymore. And then also other landscaping structures. This is a very vague discretionary term. So we'd like to look at, is that really the same as the rest of the code, or could it be a catch-all term for, frankly, anything that maybe the neighborhood association has seen that they don't want? So we'd like just to specify what that term means. And then effectively the code amendment could create smaller homes, probably will create smaller homes, but that in effect reduces families' purchasing power. They're now, using the same amount of money to purchase a less functional home, perhaps, if they're looking for additional office space or a den, with everyone working from home these days and doing homeschool. So the trade-off discussions around housing and trees are extremely well warranted. I love trees. I live in the city of Portland. I want as much tree canopy as possible. I live in East Portland. The problem is that this code change doesn't necessarily change that, and we want to have the discussion, a full, robust discussion about the trade-offs of trees and housing and how we could potentially save more trees without cutting into that extra functional living space that the houses most certainly will be cut into with this code change. So my formal request to you is the Planning Commission strike policy 2 from the package tonight, allow that code amendment to be taken out from the others that you might pass this evening, and allow the stakeholders more time to convene on some visuals of what the houses could effectively end up looking like, and other contributing factors around tree preservation. So with that, I submit my testimony on behalf of HBA. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Commissioners, any questions for Ms. Johnson?
I don't have it for Ms. Johnson, but how about Director Siegel? Am I allowed to ask that?
Sure, go ahead.
Would there be any hardship to the planning department if there is a delay?
Well, if the commission were to pull this item from the package, which we would ask that you make a recommendation on the remaining elements of the package so that those could go forward. If this element were pulled, it would, and if it were to go on its own track, as has been suggested for more public stakeholder input, it doesn't really create a conflict or any. There are no projects that are hanging in the balance, if you will. If they've already submitted for building permits, they're entitled to be reviewed under the standards that are in effect at the time they submit. It would add to staff workload. We may have to come back to you when we're goal setting in early 2021 and say, we have this task to follow up on, so we may have one fewer. There may be other things that we're not able to do because of that. I mean, it's just a trade-off. It's sort of a hypothetical. I can't really give you an example. From the neighborhood's perspective, I can't speak for them. So that's the only sort of unknown here, is that there was participation during the work session process and during the development of the draft code, and Ellen can speak more to that. There was input from the community, and so taking more time to process this would certainly give everyone an opportunity to participate and study it more closely. But I'll defer to Ellen in terms of what work has already occurred and if she feels that it would be beneficial or would add any value.
I have a comment. This is
Commissioner Beckett, maybe Director Siegel has asked, I thought, Planner Davis a question. Do you want to respond to the question now, Planner Davis?
Similar to Director Siegel, it's within the purview of the Planning Commission. If we push that off, then that might delay some other item and we might not get to it, but I don't have any specific item that it would be bumping from our workload. So it is certainly within your purview.
Thank you. Commissioner Beckett, sorry, go ahead.
Yes, this has been under consideration for over a year. It seems like we've been over it multiple times. I don't understand can you say why the neighborhood hasn't done more work to bring their objections or refinements to our attention sooner?
Commissioner Beckett, who is that question addressed to?
That's addressed to our speaker here tonight.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Beckett. So my understanding is that this specific policy amendment was suggested at the end of November of 2019, so less than a year ago. And it was the first time that it had been mentioned in a stakeholder forum. The developers that were in the room at that time with the neighborhood association, along with staff, it was the first time that they had some of them had heard of it. I'm sure that some of them had heard of it before because they work in the neighborhood association frequently, doing work there. But certainly some others that I can speak for, it was the first time that they had heard of this proposed amendment. And so while it didn't make it into the round of cleanup code amendments that went forward at that time, which went through your purview probably around early 2020, maybe starting to hit the spring of 2020, and then obviously with COVID, they might have gotten delayed. This round that you're in is a subsequent round, so this policy amendment was added to that one, but without the same amount of robust stakeholder involvement that at least HBA and some developers that work frequently in our 6 zone had a chance to participate in with the previous annual code amendments, but did not with this code amendment, simply with the way that it was suggested with the previous round, and then carried forward to the subsequent round.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Pepe, did you have a comment? Question?
Yes, Ms. Johnson. So if my understanding is correct, the neighborhood association wants this, but it sounds as if what you're saying is the stakeholders being developers and HBA didn't feel like they participated enough in order to drive the discussion on this. Is that?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
What other stakeholders have not been included?
Well, homeowners that might want to sell their home one day, or homeowners that currently are not part of the association. I mean, obviously they have the chance to do that, but because this amendment was again brought forward at that time, but then there have been no subsequent requests for gatherings on this specific code amendment between the development community, the current homeowners that may or may not be part of the neighborhood association right now within the last 10 months, and then the neighborhood association as it stood then. That's why we're asking for additional time to work with them.
Follow-up question, sorry. When did the HBA become aware of this potential code amendment?
Sometime in so there were meeting notes that were sent out in December sometime based on that November stakeholder meeting. And so we became aware of it at that time. But again, like I said, there were no subsequent stakeholder meetings that were convened on this topic.
Okay, thank you.
Right, between that November 26th generation of it from the neighborhood association in a stakeholder meeting, between that time and when the meeting notes were generated, and then moving forward till now, there were no subsequent meetings that were generated to gather the affected parties.
And did the HBA ever reach out to the city and request a meeting or anything?
When we became aware that it was on the work session agenda for the Planning Commission is when we reached out.
Okay, but
so
not
in early August, I believe.
Okay, so not between basically late December and early August. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Director Siegel, comment?
Yeah, if just so everyone's aware, the question or the comment about homeowners or property owners who may be interested in a topic like this, of course, this code change applies to the entire neighborhood or the area that's zoned R6. And we're not able to discern, which of those properties which of those property owners may want to redevelop or do remodels or additions. So really the fail-safe there as far as informing the community and giving people an opportunity to participate is the Measure 56 notice. And that's the notice that goes out to all of the property owners in that zone, letting them know that the city is conducting a public hearing on this topic, and it very specifically calls out the code change or explains that the code change could affect the use of their property and property values. And so that usually gets people, that usually gets your attention if you are paying it, if you are concerned about or interested in developing your property and you see a notice like that. So I don't know, Ellen, did you receive any calls or questions or concerns about this?
I did. I
Okay.
did receive a good handful of calls, mostly asking for clarification and trying to talk through the amendment. So yes, I did receive some follow-up questions after that Measure 56 notice went out to all of the property owners in this zone.
Sorry, Commissioner Stewart, I thought maybe you had a question. Wasn't sure.
I did, but it was very similar to Commissioner Pape's. It was more about for the Home Builders Association, when they have a concern such as this, is it pretty typical for them to approach the neighborhood association as a means of outreach to maybe share a presentation or voice their concerns about this issue? And my question originally was, did that occur at any point over the last year when your association was aware of this issue?
Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah, that's a question for you, Ms. Johnson.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So no formal outreach to the neighborhood association in particular. Again, this was, I guess based on historic practice of working with the City of Lake Oswego with Director Siegel. It's been a really good relationship for my the person that was in my prior position, as well as my other departmental colleagues who have worked in Lake Oswego, is that it's really been super collaborative. And, there's been like specific developer stakeholder meetings where, once we are made aware of them by the city, and this happens in a lot of other jurisdictions as well, where there's kind of a standing development stakeholder group. And sometimes, meetings get canceled because there's nothing on the agenda, but by and large, those occur every month to quarterly, I would say, in the jurisdictions that I work. And then when it becomes apparent that something is maybe more contentious or could utilize, like you said, a presentation maybe from one or both sides, a meeting of the minds, if you will, that's what, we've been really responsive to in the past. And so I don't know, I don't want to blame everything on COVID, but I imagine that, once kind of March hit and that we began to see as a country that COVID-19 was a force to be reckoned with. And, agendas started to get pushed and projects started to get delayed. I just maybe am giving benefit of the doubt, perhaps, both sides, my association as well as maybe the city didn't have that maybe in their bandwidth to be reaching out specifically on this current annual round of cleanup code amendments and that policy item. And as you see, 4 policy items that have garnered more public input, if you will, than just traditional, cleanup of terminology in a code. For that reason, those reasons, I'm imagining that, that historic practice of really overt and purposeful intentional collaboration for specific stakeholder meetings went a little bit by the wayside, perhaps and we, I will be the first one to say, we can bring back more of those to the forefront of our activity and put that at the forefront of our bandwidth again. And I would like to take the first step doing that, having this meeting with the neighborhood association, and I'm happy to reach out to them, specifically. I think my battery's going dead. Hold on. It's really dark. Can you guys see me okay?
It's a little dark, but we can definitely hear you.
Okay. So, so that being said, I think that the historic practice that was in place maybe took a little bit of a hit given all of the bandwidth being taken up by other competing and rightly so interests with what started to happen, in March, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Johnson. Commissioner Sumler, question for Ms. Johnson.
Ms. Johnson, do you know if there are any HBA members that live in First Edition or live in a R6 zone currently? Because it's one thing for a developer to be affected, it's another thing for a homeowner or homeowner/developer to be affected by the definition changes. Do you know if that's...
I couldn't speak to personal addresses of our members, like off the top of my head. That would be an exercise in a data pull from our database.
Sure, and maybe that's a weird question, but I was just wondering, because if there's some overlap, it'd be interesting to understand that. Secondly, are there certain elements of the definition that is potentially changing that the HBA is like super strongly against versus that they're willing to sort of budge on, whether it's the above grade structures or the stairs or something like that, where what's a real sticking point for the HBA in this case? Mm-hmm. It sounds like holistically everything, but where is the HBA willing to compromise?
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that so I guess, looking back from a historical perspective, thank you, Director Siegel, for offering a little bit of that with the R2 and the R6 being part of the neighborhood plan. I wasn't doing work in Lake Oswego in the 90s when that occurred, but I can speculate that to encourage a robust set of development standards in the R6 zone at that time, to kind of bring it maybe out of, certain, I don't want to say, so I think it used to be a little bit more rough around the edges, let's just say. So having a neighborhood plan in place, it was a great start to bringing up baby, if you will, bringing the development to like a certain standard that Lake Oswego is known for. That being said, the R6 is a smaller type of lot than a lot of other lots in Lake Oswego, and the neighborhood in which it was, had a historic kind of reputation. So perhaps, and I'm just speculating, perhaps the exception to the way that height was measured in that zone and the few structures that could be exempted from lot coverage in that zone was an encouragement to development in that zone, knowing that these lots are smaller and we want to bring a certain, level of home and new families into the area, so giving more opportunity to build a slightly larger home, or to have the wall plane extend a little bit more, and frankly to not count like every single little thing that it doesn't add up to be as much when you are counting it on a larger lot, right? I mean, percentage wise, it accounts for a lot less on a larger lot than it does on a smaller lot. So any tweaks that are made to those smaller lots, the families that live there, they feel them more, right? Because you're only on a 6,000 square foot lot or smaller. depending on what the minimum lot size is in a given zone. So does that, okay, so then you asked me, you know, where we might be able to compromise. I think that being able to measure within a 4-foot distance of you know, picking a place of measurement rather than what they call somewhat known as the 1,000 points of variability, or the carpet approach, where you're kind of spreading an area over a topographic site, which, you know, doesn't have as much of an impact on a flat site. But when you get into topography or sites that maybe have a little bit of a slope to them, then that's where you feel the measurement of how high the home can go at every given point on the site. So I think where we would be willing to compromise is like, hey, let's pick a spot, and maybe it's not the highest spot on the lot, but maybe there's some give there in terms of where we can measure from. It's not going to be the 1,000 points of variability. So like every spot on the roof has to be you know, akin to where it is on the ground below, but picking a point of measurement rather than making it much more complex in terms of the structure of the house height. And then I think that the exemptions, they need to make sense. They need to be allowed. So those stairs, those balconies that you might not think you're going to have a balcony that's higher than 30 inches and less than 5 feet, but let's let the market decide that, right? Let's let like a family that's coming in and be like, oh yeah, I do want to have some stairs up to this separate entrance of my house because I'm renting this portion out, or I'm, you know, my mother-in-law is living here and I only want her to enter this side, but yeah, it's above 30 inches for those stairs. So I think it just, you know, it makes sense to exempt certain things based on the history of a zone.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Commissioner Fisher, you have a question.
Yeah, how long do you envision this delay that you want? And I know that in that delay, I'm getting some kind of feedback. Is that anyway? So one, how long do you envision the delay? I assume in that time you're going to have meetings with the homeowners associations. Do you propose that after those meetings, you're going to bring it back to the planning commission and say, here's what we would like, and then have a discussion with the planning commission, planning developers?
So, I mean, I think the best thing would be, if you're asking me, and I can't speak for like what is allowed, you know, in your bylaws and legally, but just from a practical perspective, I would suggest that that HBA and our, you know, represented builders and developers meet with the neighborhood association within the next, you know, 2 or 3 months, at least a couple times, and see if we can come to some kind of good neighbor agreement, if you will. And that obviously is going to involve like looking at actual proposed house plans and what would versus wouldn't be allowed, and maybe what an actual structure looked like, and whether it would be allowed or not, again, and kind of what the general perception would be on that proposals. Not yet. Sorry, got my little one asking if I'm done yet. And then depending on how much staff would like to be involved in that, I mean, I would welcome that. I think that, yeah, that was something that we could have had more of in terms of the dialogue with the neighborhood association.
Vice Chair Pape, did you have a question for Ms. Johnson?
Not necessarily for Ms. Johnson, but for Ms. Davis.
Go ahead, Vice Chair Pape, and then again, I think you know, we'd like to try to conclude Ms. Johnson's testimony, but we'll open one question for Planner Davis.
Thank you, Planner Davis. In the phone calls received after the Measure 56 announcement went out. It sounded like there were quite a few phone calls. Of those, have there been any other follow-up? I'm trying to gain and measure the concern of the neighborhood outside of the neighborhood association. Can you help quantify that for us a little bit more, maybe?
Yeah, the calls that really come to my mind were mostly asking for clarification. They weren't so much concerned about the proposal. They just didn't understand what it was and saw official letterhead coming from the city, saw my name and my number and called and said, hey, what is this about? It's not really clear to me. And so I tried my best to explain it in clear English. And the at least 3 folks that I can think of off the top of my head kind of said, I'm not looking to develop. I'm not looking to sell my house. This doesn't affect me. I don't care, basically. I didn't hear from anyone who was opposed to it, except for Ms. Johnson expressing for the Home Builders Association and other builders and developers that she works with. So that was the only expression of opposition that I've received.
So no one from the neighborhood specifically opposed it when contacting you?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, I think we've had an opportunity to ask Ms. Johnson all the questions that we'd like. Is there any final questions, or I'd like to, allow Ms. Johnson to go back to her other activities? No other questions. Thanks, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much.
Iris, is there anyone else who would like to give public testimony tonight?
There is no one.
All right. Given that there's no other person that would like to give public testimony, I would like to close the public testimony portion of our discussion tonight and move on to any questions that commissioners may have. Otherwise, we can move on to deliberations. Commissioner Stewart?
Just real quick, just a clarification from my own mind. The person of the measurement requirements for the R6 zone with regards to the decks and the height of decks and how that factors into lot coverage, et cetera. Is that a departure from other zones in our code, or, I mean, as it currently stands, so the proposed change would make it more uniform with the other zones in the code? Is that the idea? Or
That is correct. Yes, so currently the R6 stands on its own with its own separate methodology for measuring height and what is or isn't accepted from lot coverage. And all of our other zones, including the R5 zone, which has a 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, have this consistent measurement, as Ms. Johnson referred, the 1,000 points of measurement, where we kind of look all around the house and the topography and take the worst case scenario and use that as our height measurement for the purpose of calculating lot coverage. That's what we do in all of our other zones. And the same with the exceptions, what does or doesn't count towards lot coverage, having that 30-inch rule is consistent in all of our other zones. So R6 is the one that stands alone.
Sorry, where is an example of R5 in the city? I'm looking at a map here. I can't seem to see.
Westlake Reserve, I know, is R5. That's the one that comes to the top of my mind.
Yeah, Westlake and Oak Creek, I believe that large area
Okay,
R5. Of course, Westlake is a planned unit development, so a little bit different, but Oak Creek, I think, is
right.
R5.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, any final questions? Otherwise, I'd like to move ahead, and kind of what my thinking is here to go ahead, proceed with a motion for approval, and then in discussion in the motion, we can step through each one of the items and ask for any changes, deletions, or additions that we want to make. So with that, I guess I'd like to move for preliminary approval of LU 20-0015 based on the findings, reasons, and conclusions in the staff report and of this commission in its deliberations, subject to any conditions stated in the staff report. I request the staff to prepare the findings, conclusions, in order for adoption at the subsequent meeting.
I
Is there a
second.
second? Second. discussion on the motion. I would like to go through and discuss the individual items and any other discussions that commissioners would like to have. Commissioner Fisher, I believe you'd like to make a comment.
No, not a comment, a question for Attorney Boone. Are we going to be voting on the entire, all the proposals at once, or are we going to be voting on each one individually?
Well, as the motion is framed, you'd be voting on the entire package. If you want to amend it and sever out the question, just feel free to do so.
Okay.
Commissioner Fisher, I was just going to say that was my approach, to go through, and the recommendation is to approve the entire application. But then in the discussion, we'll step through each one of the items individually, and each commissioner will have a opportunity then to make a recommendation on removing or adding any specific items for that.
Is that, my impression is that if we vote to say yes, we're doing it all at once.
No, Commissioner Fisher, let me clarify. We'll modify the motion, and we'll allow following changes, any deletions or additions that we want to make, subject to the motion. So there will be a modification to the motion if the commission decides that they would like to make an addition or deletion.
Okay.
Yeah, so for that, I'd like to start the discussion on the motions. Item number one, this is clarifying platting requirements and expiration of permits for lot line adjustments and resource delineations. Commissioners, any changes, any requests related to this?
Real quick, Chair, are you in the policy part, or are you back at the beginning?
I am actually in the code maintenance items, which is not part of the policy items. I will come to that at the end, and I'll discuss policy items 1 through 4. Yeah, so this is really the beginning of the specific code items, and it's item number 1, which is clarifying the platting requirements and expiration of permits for lot line adjustments and resource delineations.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Sure. Go ahead, Commissioner Fisher.
I remember we had a discussion at one point about public facilities not being allowed to go longer than 3 years. Does this impact on that at all? So for example, if a school wants to build a playground and it takes them longer than a private person would, I thought we had a discussion that we would allow public facilities a longer time than 3 years. Am I not accurate?
Well, I'll just say this does not impact that. This addresses when you have a development permit that does not involve physical construction or development. As the code section is set up, it times it as, when it's 15, it starts 3 years unless development involves construction of a structure. And then it talks about when work has reasonably continued to completion of development. So that's all premised on development activities. So this amendment is to address what happens when you have a lot line adjustment. How long does that live? When you have a resource delineation, how long does that live? I mean, those things don't have work or 15% or anything like that to trigger.
Well, use my example of the school. Supposing the school is contemplating adding a playground or something. And
Commissioner Fisher, I do recall that conversation that we had that. If memory serves me right, I think that led down the path of clarifying, and I think public schools and other public projects have, I think, a 5-year.
Right. We gave them a longer period of time because they have to deal with voter approval and all of those kind of things.
Right.
So,
they currently have a 5-year, but so they would not fall under this 3-year.
okay, so this is not going to change anything like
I
that.
don't believe so.
No, because a playground is a physical construction.
Well, but the lot line, let's say, that they want to plot out a new lot line for the playground.
Okay. Well, let me see the schedule here. 500703 17. I want to check the text. Yeah, subsection 1 as shown on the screen is incomplete. I'm just looking at, let's see, final decision. Add to that sentence, or add to that subsection 1, I'm looking at the current code. For major public facilities, the 3-year limitation does not apply to conditional use permit or modification, and a development review permit or modification is subject to a 5-year deadline.
Right.
So,
That's what I thought we had agreed to.
right. Yeah, so that text is not shown in what's on screen, but you're not modifying that text.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So, commissioners, any other comments on item 1, or it sounds like the commission is good on item number 1? All right, I'd like to move on. Item number 2, this allows residential infill development variances to the long wall plane standard. Commissioners, any requested changes, comments? None? Looks like we're good. Item number 3, this is a change in sensitive lands protection fence height to match tree production fence height. Any changes or questions? On number 3. Number 4, this clarify utilities exception in RP districts to ensure mitigation is required for expansion of existing utilities. Changes? None? Good on item number 4. Number 5, remove obsolete fence complaint procedure. No changes. Item number 6, this is a correct reduction of protected riparian areas, PRA, to reflect all sizes of PRAs. Maybe one question for Planner Davis that I had on your, update that you gave tonight. You talked about buffer averaging. You talked about that you were adding in, I believe, the 50-foot value. But on the other one, was that a discrete? Are there 3 discrete values? 25, 30 foot. Or the way that was in the presentation, it kind of was saying like 25-30. And was that a range, or is it really 3 discrete values like what's listed here under section 3B that says 25, 30 or 50? So those are 3 discrete values, not ranges. Is that correct?
Those are 3 discrete values. So
Okay.
depending on the class of the resource, which type of resource it is, and in the case of the 50-foot buffer, the 50-foot buffer only applies if you have an RP district that is adjacent to a former upland tree grove. So in 2015, there was a decision to get rid of upland tree groves on private property with the compromise that then RP districts expanded to a 50-foot buffer in those areas where those tree groves formerly existed to make sure that that habitat was protected. So it is discrete, 25, 30, and 50 foot.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Commissioner Beckett?
Yes, it says the area can be reduced if development abuts a class 1 or class 2 resource. What are class 1 and class 2 resources?
Planner Davis, I believe there's a question for you to maybe define, or Attorney Boone, class 1 resource and a class 2 resource.
They are defined in our code. Let me pull up our sensitive lands code, unless Director Siegel knows off the top of his head the difference between a class 1 and class 2 resource.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is that the stream corridors, streams were evaluated as part of the city's natural resources inventory originally in the 1980s. And then through iterations of that under statewide goal 5, as the city updated its comprehensive plan and eventually adopted a sensitive lands ordinance in the 1997-98, those stream designations were codified. And so class 1 is the one with, I guess, functions and values that warranted a higher level of protection or a greater buffer width of 30 feet, or more recently up to 50 feet. And class 2 was designated with a 25-foot buffer. And this is buffer sort of shorthand. What it is there's a stream corridor that's defined based on a number of different metrics. And then there's a protected riparian area that extends beyond the stream corridor. And those are the buffer widths that we're referring to. So class 1 is 30 feet or up to 50 feet. And class 2 is 25 feet or up to 50 feet, depending on whether that area was, that designation was replacing an RC district, which Ellen was referring to as an upland tree grove overlay.
So to say that the riparian area is reduced if it abuts those, simply because a stream is every bit as nice as a riparian area, so it takes up some of the space that otherwise would be in the riparian area?
No, the reduction, and what's referred to here as the reduction, is through the development review process. If the applicant proposes, they may propose a narrower width, a reduction, but only where the area of protection, as represented by the average buffer width, meets that standard. So that's what the reduction is about. It's about reducing the width of the buffer in certain locations, provided that the overall area of protection and the average buffer width meets the standard.
Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like the commission is good on item number 6. Moving on to item number 7, this clarifies that mitigation requirements apply to resource restoration resulting from a code violation. Commissioners, any concerns or changes? We're good with this, right? Item number 8, require pre-application conference for in-stream resource enhancement projects. Commission's good with this, no changes. Number 9, provide a clear and objective option for creation of flag lot access lanes. Commission's good with this. Number 10, move no parking requirement for outdoor dining to parking table. And there was a footnote on this that said that the amendments for the outdoor dining enclosures tentatively approved by City Council on September 1st are pending final adoption. And that for this reason, both the current and proposed code are provided in attachment 2. So it looks like there was some activity from council to move ahead on this. Any?
Yes,
Yeah, Commissioner Fisher.
I object to this. I objected to the allowance of the temporary or the seasonal construction. If you're going to have additional patrons, which is what they're hoping for, then it's going to create a parking problem. If more people are coming, then there's going to be need for more spaces. I would recommend that we do not pass this particular rule change.
Commissioners, any other comments? Agreement?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I mean, I just want to, the way I see this amendment is we have in the seasonal outdoor seasonal enclosure section, we have a provision which says that no additional parking is required. The question is whether to put it there or whether to put it in the parking code section. It's better to put it in the parking code section because that's where people look for parking requirements. So you've already made the substantive decision about the use and parking. The question is the placement in the code.
Okay.
Thank you, Attorney Boone. I think that's an excellent point. So Commissioner Fisher, given that there's no change other than moving where we actually spell out this in our code, are you okay with it?
Yeah, I didn't understand that. I can accept that. Sure.
Thank you, Attorney Boone, Commissioner Fisher. I'll move on to item number 11. Clarify that all residential zones allow manufactured homes. Commission's okay with number 11. Number 12, modify definitions of net developable area and density transfer area to simplify open space and density calculations for subdivisions dedicating land to the city. No comments, we're okay. Number 13, remove annual reporting requirement for sensitive lands map corrections. Any changes commissioners wish to make? None? Number 14, calculate bicycle parking requirements for unlisted uses based on most similar use. No changes. Number 15, clarify definition of undisturbed slopes. We're okay at number 15. Number 16, delete obsolete ADU parking requirements.
It-
Commissioner Fisher?
Is this another example of we're putting it into the parking code section and just removing it from here, or?
This is an example where the state actually does not allow requirement for an ADU parking space. So you're already not required to have a parking space for an ADU. So instead of referring to one space per unit, we're instead referring to the ORS that prohibits us from requiring it.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions? Requested none. So we're good on number 16. Number 17, adopt the fire code requirements for fire hydrant placement in new development. No changes. Go to number 17. So again, to summarize on the commission, it sounds like the commission does not wish to make any changes to the code maintenance items 1 through 17. Now we can discuss the code policy items. Policy item number 1, prevent driveway approaches from extending in front of abutting properties. Commissioners, any changes or questions, objections? None. We're good on policy number 1. Policy number 2, align lot coverage calculation in the R6 zone with other residential zones. Commissioners, we had spent a lot of time on this tonight and took a testimony from the HBA, Ms. Johnson, anticipating commissioners may want to give feedback on this.
I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah, Commissioner Beckett.
This is a item that was proposed with very careful thought by the neighborhood association. And what we heard based on calls that came in to Ellen and so on was no big objection to it from the neighborhood association. The objection that we heard very eloquently expressed tonight was from the Home Builders Association, because this would impact and make more difficult some of their work in putting a redevelopment of a home or a new home on the lot. I suggest that we not defer this as they requested, that the neighborhood association has given it very careful thought, and that's the primary voice that we should be listening to.
Thank you, Commissioner Beckett. Commissioners, any other comments commissioners would like to make? Commissioner Fisher?
I hate to disagree with Dave because I like him, but what is the harm in letting them have another shot at this? Ms. Johnson said it would only be about 3 months at the most. And we are trying to get all people involved. That's what the CIC is all about. What's wrong with giving them their another shot? I mean, it's not like it's going to impact any developmental decisions that are up for grabs right now. I don't see the harm in postponing this, but for a limited time. Let's give them the 3 months. And then at that point, if they haven't done what they are supposed to do, then I agree with Commissioner Beckett. But what's wrong with giving them the extra time?
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. So it sounds like you would be in favor of offering a deferred with some expectation that it would be completed in a timely manner, somewhere in the order of 3 months.
That's perfect. That says it exactly.
Other commissioners? Comment, Vice Chair Pape?
Ms. Davis, or Director Siegel, how far in when were the Measure 56 notices sent to those homeowners?
Late August or early September. Let me find that exact date for you.
Of 2020?
Yes, this year. The Measure 56 notice are sent after the second work session, so that we have a more standardized, are pretty set on what we're doing. So that's why we wait until that point in time to send those out.
I would just also
But we're
add that
also required by the state to send it out not more than 40 days ahead of the first hearing, but at least 20 days beforehand. So there is a prescribed time frame.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other comments on this? Commissioner Stewart?
Well, generally, I'm in favor of Commissioner Beckett's standpoint. I feel like, despite the discussion that we had this evening, there seemed to have been ample time to broach this directly to the neighborhood association, any concern that the Home Builders Association had. And if it was, and I would think that if it was a big concern, a large enough concern, that they would have made it happen. On the other aspect of this is in thinking about the way the height is measured, whether you're finding a high point within the footprint and then going up within 4 feet or whatever. I mean, you're talking basically about, whether you can put a 12-12 pitch in a roof versus a 9-12 pitch. I mean, I really don't, I don't think there's going to be enough of an impact to the height limit to, if you can build a 2-story house, you're going to be able to build it with or without this, without this amendment as it's currently written. I don't see the change being as great as it's being expressed. And, frankly, making the code simpler and easier to understand and predictable, I think just makes people feel more comfortable and more confident in what they can do. So I'm in favor of moving this forward. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Vice Chair Pepe, let me go back to you. I know you asked a question, but I didn't capture kind of what your feedback was to defer or not defer. You just basically ask a question. Can you give feedback?
I'm really torn, but I'm leaning towards approving right now based on if the Home Builders Association knew about this back in late December or say mid-January, for benefit of the doubt, they've had ample time, way more time than the actual homeowners in this neighborhood have probably had to digest this. And so extending that for the reasons that I think were presented today by the Home Builders Association, I don't know that I can rationalize that as being a valid reason to push this off. But I'm having a hard time if the homeowners only found out about this in, say, mid-August, with everything going on, the fires, the pandemic, so on and so forth. There's a lot of things that would have come between them and fully digesting what this might mean for their property. So I'm trying to figure out, have they really had enough time? And I'm leaning more towards they probably haven't had enough time. And so I don't think that there would be a harm in allowing the homeowners, and which would also allow the developers and home business association some more time to digest this and bring this back up in whether it's 2 months or 3 months or whatnot.
Thank you. Planner.
I just wanted to
Davis,
provide the answer that the Measure 56 notice was mailed on August 25th.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. Commissioner Similar, any comments?
I'm in favor of pushing forward with it. I mean, it was good to hear Ms. Johnson's objection and her organization that she represents objecting to this, but without having, I mean, no one from the actual neighborhood called in to say that they don't agree with it either. And so it sounds like there's a lot of people within the community themselves that are for this and are not coming out of the woodwork now that they've been notified to, object to it. So I'm in favor of pushing forward with it.
From my perspective, I was always concerned about, the code that we create, any unintended consequences that may result in that. Similar to Commissioner Fisher's comments, trying to maximize citizen involvement, feel like all organizations on either side of the argument are given the chance to respond to it. I think is important. I think some of the concerns they were raising, there was many comments. Some concerns were related to what Commissioner Stewart was saying, that the amount, the impact on the building, may be significant, concerning. But there was also comments about the trees, and I think the trees were one of the big things, and saying maybe some of the changes that we're making won't have any impact on the trees. And so I'm thinking that it would be good to defer it, allow more opportunity to get feedback. And so with that, I think we have kind of a split recommendation from the commission. There's 3 commissioners, Pepe, Stewart, similar, who I think are recommending, and Commissioner, did I skip Commissioner Bucket? So maybe I have Commissioner, is that correct, Vice Chair Pepe, that your input feedback was to move forward with it? Vice Chair Pepe.
After hearing, see, then I start listening to other people talking. Commissioner Stewart is probably feeling this a little, I don't know. Commissioner Semler just made a very good point, though. And in all likelihood, a lot of folks aren't probably coming forward because they read the document, that Measure 56, and said, fantastic, I'm in favor of this, so I don't need to necessarily take the time to call in and give it support. And we didn't hear any disconsent. So no, I would probably go ahead and move forward with it as is.
Okay, so let me make sure I got this right. So Commissioner or Vice Chair Pepe move forward, Commissioner Stewart move forward, Commissioner Beckett move forward, Commissioner Simler recommendation move forward. So there's 4 commissioners to move forward, and then Commissioner Fisher and myself defer. So it seems like there's a recommendation by the majority of the commission to move forward, not keep the amendment as is, and 2 commissioners make the recommendation to defer. So my, again, I think how we handle this is that we note kind of the polling of the commission, but then the motion will continue not to change on policy item number 2. Policy item number 3, definitions, adding co-housing to multifamily definition. Commissioners, any feedback on this? We did receive a testimony or comments, I think, and excuse me, it was comments in some of our working sessions from. I thought these were clarified, that this is really independent of the state bills. It doesn't really change density. So I felt like there was some misunderstanding that got clarified, and I was okay with policy item number 3, the add co-housing, the multifamily definition, for those reasons. Commissioners, any other comments on this? No, we're okay with it. Policy item number 4, the definitions of community, institution, and institutional use. Again, kind of a simplification to make it easier to understand. Commission's okay with this? No changes? All right. So going back to the original motion, then, this was a motion for preliminary approval of LU 20-0015 based on the findings, reasons, and conclusions in the staff report and the commission in its deliberations. There's no request to change any of the items, and the commission requests that staff prepare the findings, conclusions in order for adoption at a subsequent meeting. And there was a second on the motion. So Iris, would you please call the roll?
And I believe we have Jean Hall with us this evening, although Iris is identified there. Is that right, Jean?
Yes, I'm using Iris's ID.
Thank
Oh,
you.
oh, sorry, Jean. Sorry.
Could you remind me who seconded that one?
Hmm.
I believe it was Commissioner Fisher. Was no.
Okay. Are you ready for the roll?
Oh, maybe clarification. Commissioner Fisher, would you second the motion?
Wait, the motion that said that we might do it on separate,
No, this was a motion to approve LU 20-001 based on this. So there's no changes to it.
no,
It was just to take it as is. Yeah.
I'll accept it.
Yeah.
I'll second the motion.
So Mr. Fisher had second. We went through. There's no changes. So would you please call the roll on the motion to approve LU 20-0015?
Before you call the roll, I'd like to make a comment. The work on this by the staff is outstanding. When you look at all the detail in it and all the code they had to go through to do this, this was a superb effort on their part, simplifying things, eliminating redundancies, making sure that the various neighborhoods are in sync with each other on these things. This is a tremendous effort that they put into this year's code changes. So thank you to the staff.
I second that.
Thank you, commissioners. Right, Jean, would you please call the roll? Jean, I was wondering if we can go through and ask the commissioners for approval.
Does she know she's muted?
Maybe not. Yeah, Jean.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Beckett?
Yes.
Fisher?
Yes.
Heap?
Yes, with the comments being recorded, especially on policy item number 3 relating, excuse me, policy item number 2 related to the lot coverage calculation.
Pape?
Yes.
Semler?
Yes.
Stewart?
Yes.
All right,
Great.
that's it.
Thank you.
This is a tentative decision concerning the commission's recommendation, and final decision be brought back to the commission for a written order on October 12th to be forwarded to the city council.
Thank you. So next on our agenda tonight is other business. I didn't have any other business. Director Siegel, any other business that you want to raise?
No, thank you, Chair. No other business.
Right. And then moving on, item number 9 on the agenda, schedule review. Director Siegel, would you like to give us a schedule update?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Planning Commissioners, your next meeting is on October 12th, and you have a public hearing scheduled on a zone change and amendments to the Community Development Code pertaining to affordable housing on the Merrillhurst property. You will also have findings for consideration and adoption for the annual Community Development Code amendments. In addition, I believe Eric Olson, Senior Planner Olson, will be joining us to provide an update on House Bill 2001-2003 rulemaking. LCDC is in the public hearing process now on that, so we anticipate some updates there. And unless there's anything further that you would like us to bring to you, that's what we have scheduled on October 12th.
Thank you, Director Siegel. Commissioners, any other comments? Okay, none. I guess tonight, before I like to review, I mean, Lake Oswego is a diverse and inclusive community, and so I know tonight a lot of the members of the community in the Jewish faith are celebrating Yom Kippur. So I'd just like to wish a good holiday for all those who are celebrating the holiday. And that was it. I'd like to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Bye.
Good
See
night.
everyone later.
Good night.
Bye.